Hi everyone, my name is Darryl Panes, CEO at As Good As Gold Australia. And this evening, once again, I'm joined by my brother Brian,
Thank you, Darryl.
partner at As Good As Gold. And this evening we interview Alasdair Macleod, advisor to As Good As Gold Australia. Good evening, Alasdair.
Good morning to you from here.
There's always that time difference, isn't it, Alasdair?
Yeah, I think we're on the right side of the coin here, though. What time exactly is it over there, Alasdair?
It's about, I suppose, yeah, it's about 20 to 11 in the morning.
Oh, well, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's when you're doing interviews at 6 o'clock in the morning or at midnight in the evening. It's a bit hard, but right now it's not too bad either, both ways.
We feel the interviews with England are a good time. But the ones in the United States, and depending on which state you're in, but sometimes they're a bit hard to tackle.
I can imagine.
We have been through an extremely busy period, and it continues. What we're finding, it's a little bit like, I think, what David Morgan was talking about recently in our last interview, when he said, when all else fails, people run to gold. And pretty much everything else is failing at the moment, and that's where people are heading. I think Justin Trudeau did us all a favour in that regard. I mean, just when he froze the accounts of lots of Canadians, that message went all around the world, and we've just had so many people saying, if it could happen there, even though the decision was reversed, it could happen anywhere. And so people were just wanting to get their money out of the bank and into gold. They do some research and they've recognised in this environment that is the best move that they can make. What I wanted to, so we're expecting this to continue. Refiners have got gold 1 minute and then haven't the next, so that they could say, well, look, we've got some gold available on Friday, and you ring them on Friday and you lock in however much you want, and on Monday you're expecting to be able to do the same again, and they're out. And this is the sort of, so I can see what's going to happen here. Yep. I mean, as this ramps up, and it is continuing to do so, it's going to get harder and harder to obtain.
Yeah,
and we know the story.
And obviously a lot more expensive. Anything, generally, anything supply and demand, you'll find out it gets more expensive. It's harder to find.
Yeah, people say to me, is it the right time to buy it now? Absolutely, it's the right time to buy it now. It's going to, you won't be able to get it. Or if you do, it'll be at a much higher price. Alasdair, I want to talk about a subject just firstly, about something that you've been referring to for some time now. And you've been right with reference to your interest rate reference. And you have mentioned on a couple of interviews that the possibility of the US going to 8% interest rates thereabouts, and the ramifications that would have on the economy. The Federal Reserve has now come out and said that there will probably be another 6 rate hikes in this year, somewhere between 1/4% and 1/2%. Generally, and as we know it, in a situation like this, the Fed would be pretty conservative in their views. So it's quite possible that it could be, the rate hikes could be in excess of that. But let's just say for a moment that they had 6 increases at 1/2%, it's 3%. Now, I'm of the opinion that, and I think the world knows this, America sneezes and we all catch a cold. We tend to follow suit. So one could expect a similar result here in Australia and many countries around the world. So I know that if interest rates increase by 3%, that would double the interest rate on housing loans here in Australia. That would be horrific. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think that the Fed's do you think that's about the mark? Do you expect that there will be a half a dozen increases of around 1%. What do you think the ramifications would be from that, if that is in fact the case?
I mean, the Fed has a problem that it can't admit to the debasement of the dollar, which is actually what's happening. And so long as the purchasing power of the dollar sort of remains sort of reasonable, I mean, not declining, not crashing, then they're going to try and control interest rates by subduing them as much as possible. I mean, we've seen that and we'll continue to see that. But the reality is, I mean, you've got to think what interest rates are. They're misusing them. They seem to think that interest rates are the cost of money. Now, it is to a borrower, but to a lender, it's not a cost of money. It's the compensation that you would expect for doing without your money for a period of time. And normally you analyze, you look at an annual rate. So if, let us say, you were going to do without your Australian dollars for a year as a lender, like you were going to sort of buy a bond, let's say, a short-term government bond, then you would expect a return which would, first of all, compensate you for the loss of possession of the currency. And secondly, any expectation that you might have for the loss of its purchasing power over that period. And that is before you even think of getting a real return for making your money available to a third party. So if you have got prices generally rising at a rate, I mean, if we take the CPI in America, we're now looking at something like 8%, then that implies really that, a sensible person wouldn't want to lend money to the US government, say for a year, at anything less than about, well, I don't know, like you could say sort of 9%, 10%, something like that. Now, that's obviously way away from anything that the Fed is talking about and anything any other central banks are talking about. But that's the reality of the situation. I'm talking about a market rate, as it were, compared with the rate that is suppressed by the authorities. The authorities don't understand what the function of interest rates is. It is, it is the compensation for loss of possession of your money. And if they're debauching the currency, then obviously that compensation's got to go up. We're going to see continued debauchement of currencies, I'm afraid. So this is not something that is going to pass. I mean, this was the argument that they tried to push, about price rises being transient and all the rest of it. And that's so obviously not the case now. That there is an awakening, I think, in the markets that actually interest rates have got to rise quite a lot. Now, the fact of the matter is that the vast majority of people in the investment community have been trained in Keynesian economics, which is a form of economic belief that basically serves the state. It doesn't serve the individual at all. You discard, what you know from your own experience in return for this sort of pseudoscience, which you're told actually is what applies in life. But the fact of the matter is that interest rates in the market, or as demanded by the market, are going to be considerably higher than anything anyone is talking about. Mm. Now, if on top of that you throw in the counterparty risk side, just imagine if, let us say, interest rates go halfway towards what I'm talking about. Let's say a yield on a 1-year US Treasury bond goes to 5%. Now, under those circumstances, you then start thinking about the risks that apply to your money from potential corporate failures, bank system failures, government spiraling out of control, the whole thing. And so then you've got an additional margin on top. So you can see that if you don't actually address what savers actually require, then you immediately getting into a situation which is spiraling out of control. And that's roughly where we are, Darryl, with interest rates. I mean, quite frankly, to talk about 3% Fed funds rate is, it doesn't even scratch the surface. What we face, and particularly with what's happening to commodities at the moment, we face the debasement of currencies at an accelerating rate. There's no way that anything like current interest rates, there's no way that even a 3% Fed funds rate deals with this situation. And if we're going to raise interest rates, I mean, if markets are going to force governments into higher interest rates, as I firmly expect them to do, then the bubble, the financial asset bubble, is just going to go pop. I mean, what are your equities going to be worth? What are your bonds going to be worth? I mean, down is the short answer. And the economic ramifications of that are very, very serious. So, no, I mean, this is not good. I mean, I can't see where this is going to stop. It's going to be a crisis. How do they respond? Well, print more money. So why do you buy gold? Because they don't print gold. They only mine it out of the earth, and it comes out at roughly a rate, as we managed to demonstrate since Columbus, which incidentally was the start of double entry bookkeeping. When Columbus sailed the ocean blue, we could then begin to record the amount of gold above ground stocks, or make estimates. And over a long period of time, quite clearly, the expansion in the quantity of above ground gold stocks has pretty much kept pace with the expansion of the global population. So, you want a non-inflationary place to hide? Well, the answer is have some real money. Oh, and incidentally, with respect to gold and silver coin, that is the legal definition of money. Legal definition. I know the Americans for the last 50 years have told us that gold is a pet rock, but actually, in all legality, they are completely wrong. And the bits of paper that your central bank produces is called currency. It is not money. And your bank account is credit. It is credit that you are giving the bank for, the possession of your currency or your wealth in the form of currency. So there is only one thing under these circumstances to have, and that's real money. And real money is only one thing, and that is metallic money, which is either gold or silver, nothing else.
You mentioned inflation. There's an interesting article through Zero Hedge, only over the last day or two. And they're talking about the inflation, the skyrocketing inflation in Germany at the moment. Aldi have just announced a 20 to 50% increase in food prices as of this coming Monday. Could you elaborate on what this could mean? I mean, it's not just, one would think, not just going to stop in Germany. Do you think it's got anything to do with the increase of 40% to M2 money supply over the last couple of years? Could this be part of the reason? And I'd like your thoughts on whether or not this could be a precursor to hyperinflation. I mean, Germany's been through this before, 1923, of course. They don't need to see this again.
No.
But a 20 to 50% increase in food items overnight, basically. What are your thoughts on this?
I hadn't seen that headline, but in a sense, I wouldn't be surprised because Aldi runs a business which is, very, very slim margins. And so any increase in their input costs are going to be reflected very rapidly in the cost of their product. So in a sense, I'm not surprised. Germany does have a real problem because they have a coalition of Social Democrats and Greens. And believe it or not, despite this massive energy crisis that Germany now faces, only a week ago they were saying they're not going to reopen. They're not going to reopen the nuclear plants. They're going to close them as planned. Come on, I mean, this is ridiculous, completely ridiculous. And of course, German industry is up in arms over the whole thing. I know you probably want to talk about Russia later, but I mean, there is no doubt what is happening to the east of Germany is creating huge problems for the EU. And I mean, it is, what can one say? Input costs in Germany, I mean, I have seen the producer price indexes, sort of rising like sort of 20% or something in recent months. So, yeah, that's very definitely a problem. The other problem, of course, is that the euro itself has been declining against the dollar. So what we see in the dollar, we're seeing in spades in the euro. And that, I think, just considerably worsens the situation for any consumer in the EU and in the eurozone, because they're finding that prices are just rising and rising and rising, and also because you have got other problems. I mean, the cost of energy is affecting food production to a substantial degree, so that gives another ratchet effect, if you like, on food prices. So, yeah, I mean, the inflation situation, I sometimes think that inflation is actually such a misleading term. Really what we should be talking about, and this is to your point about US money supply, what we should really be talking about is the falling purchasing power of a fiat currency, because that's what it is. And the reason it's falling is because they've increased the quantity to accommodate everybody who wants to buy anything. That's essentially what it amounts to. So, this is going to continue. I mean, this isn't stopping. And not only that, but you've got to think, what's the response going to be to rising prices, the previous debasements of the currency, from governments? Well, the answer is nobody can go without. You've got to make the money available for them to buy this and that, rather than have to choose between this or that. So what we're seeing is a situation which will simply lead to even more currency debasement. It's that, I'm afraid, is baked in the cake. And we've also got the other problem, which I was referring to earlier, about the asset bubble being unwound by rising interest rates. And this is something that the Keynesians find impossible to reconcile. How can you have a recession, a fall in demand, and yet still see prices rise? Well, the answer is quite simple. It's not prices rising. In real terms, they're probably falling, but it's the currency which is collapsing. That is the whole point. And for some reason, people are just completely blind to this. And I think this is why, when we talk about inflation, we sort of automatically talk about not money going down, but prices going up. Actually, it's money going down. That's actually what we should be understanding. And I think that for anybody trying to get protection, they've got to understand that actually is the condition. And if you're going to get protection from this condition, then you basically got to get out of fiat. That's what it is. That's what it amounts to.
No, agree with you 100%.
Yeah. And just to comment on that, Alasdair, and I do, look, with Darryl, we do a lot of talking to new clients that have never bought gold and silver before. And, for me, I take them back to the start of the year, 1913, of the Federal Reserve. And we have a bit of a chuckle because, back then, when they first started to print the US dollar, I say to them, well, let's have a look at that. They print the first dollar, right? So what do you get for your dollar back then? And, I estimated that a cup of coffee would cost about, in their language, a dime or 5 cents, right? And today, 110 years later, that cup of coffee is now $4.50. It is in Australia anyway, $4.50. I said, what has changed? The cup of coffee remains the same. It's a cup of coffee, whether it was 110 years ago or today. What has really changed is the value of the dollar, because you need $4.50 instead of 5 cents. And it's the currency falling, not the increase in prices of a cup of coffee. Alasdair, in the news, certainly very much so over here, and I'm sure it is anywhere in the world where there's everybody's got a TV set. We've seen the Russian aggression And I mean, I'm not a Putin lover, but there are certain reasons why I think he's doing what he's doing. But what my question here is going to be, Russia wants its exports, as I see it, to be paid by the customer in rubles or gold. Now, some people are seeing this as a gold standard. I don't think so, but could you elaborate on this latest move by Russia? Why are they asking this?
You're right to say it's not a gold standard. I think the way to look at it is what is the relationship between gold and commodities, and particularly energy? And my colleague at Gold Money, James Turk, for as long as I've known him, has produced a very simple chart, and that is the price of oil, crude oil, in gold, dollars, pounds, and euros. And basically, between the 1960s and today, the price of oil in gold has fallen by roughly 30%.
Right.
The price of oil in dollars, I mean, has gone up sort of, 80 times or something. Well, not quite, 40 times. Sterling even more. And huge, great swings, whereas gold is just sort of, long. I think the highest price in gold, it's been something like, sort of on an index from 100, it's gone up, it's sort of doubled, if you like. That was the highest price. So what we can conclude from that is there is a very close relationship. And, this we know from reading economics, there is a very close relationship between gold and energy prices. And other people have expressed this another way. They say the cost of a decent toga back in Roman times in gold is roughly the same cost of a suit from Savile Row today.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it illustrates the point. I think what Russia is doing by effectively introducing a gold peg, and this is only for domestic banks, by the way, is that they are, if you like, linking the ruble through gold into commodities generally. So the move, if you like, is a two-stage move. The first is to produce that link, which is incidentally explained by the Russian central bank as permitting banks to lend money to gold producers. Because the export of Russian gold has been banned. The refiners are on the banned list from the LBMA now, and so on and so forth. So they can't sell their gold outside Russia anymore. So what the central bank is effectively saying is that we will buy gold at 500 rubles a gram, which means that a bank can lend money against gold production, still continue. Now, this makes an awful lot of sense. The only thing in my mind is, if that makes so much sense, which I would agree with you entirely, why they're not doing it for platinum? Why they're not doing it for, any of these other things where there is a substantial element, if you like, of foreign earnings by exports, sort of commodities and so on. So the gold is definitely special. And I take this as being linking the ruble into, if you like, a sort of general commodity backing, rather than tied, if you like, in with the international currency system. So that's the first bit. The second leg of this, as you rightly point out, is the insistence that energy is paid for in rubles. Now, quite frankly, there are not enough rubles around to do this. So we have a situation where you can set up, if you like, a sort of a euro-ruble market, which can be done. That's not a problem. And that would be the mechanism I would see whereby rubles would be created within the banking system, and probably by the Chinese banking system rather than anyone else, in order to pay Russia in rubles for its energy exports. Now, what the Russians have done is they have taken a leaf out of the American playbook. If I go back to the creation of the petrodollar, this is exactly what the Americans did. Kissinger and Nixon went and saw the Saudis and said, we need to establish a global currency. We want that to be the dollar. We will let you price your oil in anything you want, at any level you want. Obviously, we can't interfere with that. But one thing we will insist on is that you accept payment for your oil in nothing other than US dollars. Yeah. And in those days, when you had Sheikh Yamani, who was sort of, the glamour boy running OPEC and all the rest of it, that meant basically that all the other members of OPEC went along with this petrodollar invention. And that has led to a situation where the dollar, after the sort of very turbulent 1970s, became very much the international currency. And there's been an accumulation of foreign ownership of dollars. I mean, I was looking at the US Treasury tick figures yesterday, which is a Treasury International Capital figures. And if you look at long-term financial securities, short-term financial securities and cash, foreigners own over $33 trillion. I mean, this is huge. When you think that the US economy is only about 23 trillion. So that is what has happened over all that time. So you can see now that reverting to the situation with Russia, she's actually bringing in a new era. We're moving away from the financialization use of a currency into a commodity-backed currency. I mean, I'd love to say that we're back on a gold standard, but no, we're not. This is the ruble effectively being backed by its commodity exports. And interestingly, China has also got the same message because, and I know we've talked about this before, back in March 2020, when the Fed reduced interest rates to zero and started QE of 120 billion a month, the Chinese realized very, very quickly that actually what the Americans were doing was they were debasing the dollar. And they didn't want to be part of this. They wanted to protect themselves from this massive debasement of the dollar. And to your point, Darryl, M2 increased by 40%, from then. So the Chinese protected themselves by stockpiling every commodity, including oil, that they could get their hands on. And the situation today is they now own 70% of the world's stockpile of maize. I think it's something like 60 to 65% of the world's wheat. Or it could be rice. I mean, you've got rice as well in there, and you've got soya as well, soybeans. So, I mean, soybeans are about sort of 35%, something like that. But this is for 20% of the world's population. The rest of us, the other 80%, which includes you and I and the sub-Saharan Africans and all the rest of it, we are, if I can use an Australian farming expression, sucking on the hind tit. So this is what we face in the summer. And then, of course, on top of that, you've got the Ukrainian situation, Ukraine being the breadbasket of Europe, common description. So exports of grain from that region, not just the Ukraine, but also the Russian steppes as well, severely restricted, if they happen at all, plus all the fertilizer that comes out of that region, which is essential for production in the rest of the world. I mean, what you've seen with Aldi, I think, is only the start of it. This is going to be a very, very difficult year. I mean, as the year progresses, I think these price rises in food are going to be, certainly for a lot of us, they're going to be catastrophic. At the moment, we've got the energy crisis, which is hitting the elderly and all the rest of it because they can't afford to keep themselves warm and so on and so forth. But okay, we go into the Northern Hemisphere summer, you go into your winter. I mean, we're going to have, in our summer, we're going to have these food problems. And guess what? I mean, you know, the Western establishment only knows one thing, and that is, you know, you've got to keep people happy. You've got to keep them mobile. So we could just got to make the money available for them to do this, which means debasing currencies even more. So we come back to Russia. What is Russia doing? It is insulating itself from the inevitable crisis, which, I mean, whether they deliberately triggered it or whatever, I mean, it's a matter for debate, but the reality is it's happening.
Yeah.
And I just think that this is it is a pivotal moment, and it is going to work very much against the Western establishment, with Keynesian management, the complete ignoring of the relationship between currency and its purchasing power. I think this Russian thing is a major change, really, Brun. I mean, the way this is evolving, we're seeing a split in the world between Russia, China, and the members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, making up roughly 40% of the world's population. And that's the dynamic population. We're old hat. I mean, you know, we're now all, you know, gone woke. And, you know, we think that energy is bad. You know, we've got to stop people doing things and all the rest of it. I mean, you know, this is completely different from what's going on in Asia. In Asia, I mean, a lot of the sort of the international flows which survive this transition are just going to go into Asia. And guess what? The governments don't need the money because they run budget surpluses. So this would go into development, for example, of, you know, the economies to the north of Tibet, you know, all those sort of Russian stans, and all along the Silk Road. And so this is a major change we're seeing. I think it's fascinating. It is major. And it's something which will probably end up effectively destroying Western currencies.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we've known that is the direction of travel. We just didn't know quite how we were going to get there. It's becoming a bit clearer how we're going to get there.
Yeah, yeah. It is interesting that it was probably a good 12 months ago when I was reading articles about China storing more grains. You know, it was in the headlines that I read, right? Always in the headlines, they were storing up on all those commodities. Now you start to see why. You know, then they do not want to be in a position where they cannot feed their population, because they've got a 1.3 billion and they don't want them rioting out there for food. No, absolutely. Let's continue on, Alasdair. I read a bit of King World News, and you do some reporting with them. You recently commented that through your own reliable sources that Russia could have possibly 12,000 tons of gold, and China possibly, again, 20,000 tons. They don't say, they say 2.2 or 2.3 thousand, but consistently you and other commentators are saying 20,000 tons. So you add those two together and you got 32,000 ton. So I look at the quote that says, "He who has the gold makes the rules." That's been around for a little while, Darryl.
Yep.
The rest of the world central banks have only maybe 35,000 tons. So together, you've got two countries equal to the rest of the world central banks. What's your thoughts on this situation?
The information I had actually comes from a source which I have always found to be reliable in the past. So I can't comment really beyond that. But he reckons that on his information, and he's got some very, very good contacts within Russia, within sort of various, if you like, sort of security-ish type entities. And he is informed that it's around about 12,000. Now, we're only talking about the state's ownership of gold. China's gold, with which this individual concurs, incidentally, I originally estimated to be about 20,000 tons. And that was a figure going back to 2002. So the state quite likely has accumulated more since then. So it could be 30, but we don't know. Again, we're only talking about the state. Now, the state can own gold, gold bullion, but not included in its reserves. I mean, there's nothing to stop it doing that. In fact, the accounting around it is extremely weak. According to the IMF, and I was looking at this earlier today, a central bank can have an unallocated gold account outside the country, and count that as part of its gold reserves. What?
What?
This is mythological gold in the gold reserves. But when you think that since 1971, the Americans have been, trying to sort of tell us all that gold is a pet rock and have been suppressing the price by various means, I mean, you can imagine that quite a lot of gold has actually flowed out of the central banks into, through leasing, through swaps, and also through unallocated accounts. I mean, this is crazy. So, how much we have, I think, is a very, very big question. We will only discover that, I think, once the dust settles after a crisis. But Russia and China, between them, definitely have an awful lot of gold. And apart from anything else, I mean, if you want confirmation that this is so, you have to ask yourself, why is it that China has placed such an emphasis on gold production, gold refining, even importing doré from other countries, refining it, and not 1 ounce gets out of China? I mean, literally, they hang on to the whole thing. And then in 2002, they suddenly changed policy and said, okay, individuals can now own gold. So they set up the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And from then, I mean, if you just see what's being delivered out of it, over 20,000 tons has now been delivered into the hands of the general public. So now this doesn't allow also for gold that has gone back in as scrap. So it is a gross figure, but nonetheless, you can see that Asia basically suddenly has got an awful lot of gold. And Russia, again, is a big gold mining producer. And I think there are 3 big mines there still developing out there. So they understand that gold is money. They understand that what the Americans have been doing, trying to trash gold and say that, no, the dollar is money, is completely wrong. So this situation, I think, explains the relative situation, which you pointed out about, what the Russians may or may not have, what the China may or may not have. But don't forget that on the other side, because we have been buying into the American desire to replace gold with the dollar, that our central bank reserves may not even be there. I mean, this is a very serious allegation I'm making, but just look at the evidence. And there was a chap called Frank Venerosa who back in 2002 made a speech in Lima, and Venerosa had done some very serious research. Also talking to Terry Smeaton, who was the head of the foreign exchange department in the Bank of England in those days, who I actually used to lunch with. I never asked him about gold. I wish I had now, but he's dead. Terry's dead now. But anyway, Terry Smeaton, sort of confirmed to Frank Venerosa that not only did leasing activities happen, but I mean, they happened on on quite a big scale. We're going back to, he gave his speech in Lima in 2002. I think Terry probably retired at about that time. So, and his estimate was that of the roughly, I think at the time, 24,000 tons of central bank gold, that anything between 10 and 14,000 tons of it was out on lease at that time. So, this is out on lease. This means not in the possession of the banks. So that was at that time. Now, do we think that it's come back in? Well, since 2002, the price of gold has risen from roughly under $300 to the current over $1900. So I think the answer is probably not. How much gold do we have? I mean, as sort of, non-Asian central banks. Well, nobody's going to tell us the truth. And it's hardly surprising that, you find that when Germany sort of gets suddenly a bit sort of itchy about the gold that is outside the country and therefore not under the Bundesbank's direct control, and so they go to the Americans and say, please can we send some of our gold back? The Americans say, hold on a minute. This needs planning. We'll get you 3 ounces over the next 7 years, or something. So, and then the other thing, I mean, you get reports which, I don't know if they're true, but the first thing that happens when you they knock over a regime like Gaddafi's Libya is, the sort of blue seals come in and, with helicopters and all the rest of it, and they blow up the central bank, take out all the gold, put it in their helicopters, and boom, they're off.
Yeah.
Ukraine had exactly the same thing. So there does seem to be a little bit of a shortage in the central banks who claim that they've got, sort of 30-odd thousand tons. So this is something we're going to find out, I think, and it is going to be fascinating as a student of gold, but I suspect that the answer is not going to be very good for us.
No.
I'm sure you're right.
I will say, Darryl, that Alasdair, John Adams, who we deal with here in Australia, and he pointed out that all Australia's got is about 80 tonnes. And by the way, 77 tonnes are in the Bank of England. We have about 3 tonnes in Australia. So I don't think we have much show.
I think you've got more gold than that.
I think I've got more gold than that. Yeah, that's exactly right. Oh, dear. Question on silver, Alasdair. Let's look at silver. The silver price has been stagnating while all other commodities are drastically rising. Why is it being held down, and when do you see a serious lift off when all around us green energy has been talked about around the globe?
It's one of the big mysteries. I suspect that the answer is, again, that there is price suppression going on. It's probably for different reasons than from gold, because central banks don't hold silver.
No.
They don't, even though it is legally money, they don't recognize it as such. But its industrial use, I think, is very, very important. And I suspected some time ago that actually, when we had JP Morgan sort of effectively running the silver market in America, that there was this sort of relationship between them and China in particular, which was the biggest consumer of silver and also refiner of silver. And I think basically what happened was that, you have a silver mine, say, in the Andes. Okay, the guy from Trafigura comes along and he looks at your doré and he gives it a certificate. You can then take that certificate, or he will do it for you, goes to JP Morgan. JP Morgan then advances you the money to pay the wages and all the rest of it. Contractually, it is then shipped to China to be refined. China ends up with the silver. You've paid your workers at the mine site. Trafigura has earned its commission. And meanwhile, the position has been hedged on COMEX by selling it forward. So, or selling the future forward, as it were. So it seemed to me that was the sort of thing that was going on. And I was speaking at a conference in New York. I think that must have been about 2014. And I went around a whole range of these small silver companies who are exhibiting. And I was getting the same story from all of them, that, someone like from Glencore or Trafigura or whatever would come and assess their doré, and on that basis, they could finance their production. These were, sort of the smaller end of the mining business. I'm not talking about really small silver mines. I'm talking about mines which probably would be capitalized at $100 million or $200 million, something like that. So, I mean, I think the point I'm making is that you have got parties involved in there who basically want to keep the price down for industrial purposes. And, meanwhile, as students of money, we're always talking about it in monetary terms. So you can see there's this huge, great sort of clash, if you like, of cultures in the market. And I think that's the best I can come up with as an answer. I mean, there's no other justification really for having silver on a gold-silver ratio of 78, I think it is at the moment. So, no, I mean, I think it's something as I have described, something like that.
Yeah.
Obviously, as gold begins to move, I think that situation will break. And this time, I don't think it'll stop at $30. I think it'll go right through. I mean, as money, real money, by which I mean gold and silver, become more important, that relationship should move back towards, the gold-silver ratio should move back towards 20. So the potential for someone who's just trying to get out of the fiat currency system, there is more potential, if you like, in terms of wealth creation and wealth preservation in silver than there is in gold.
Right. Do you feel, I mean, I read an article, and I'll finish off here, but I read a number of articles, and certainly in the last couple of months, where Maserati, the motor car company, Maserati, have said they're going to be all electric motor vehicles by 2030. General Motors and Ford would be 2035. Now, I know that the amount of silver used in an electric motor vehicle, right, is much greater than a combustion petrol car. So, Alasdair, would you think that with the electric vehicles and all the other industries that use silver will be a big part of the push for we must have the silver, we can't get the silver, it's coming out at 8.5 to 1 to gold. This will also help to push the price of silver up?
I have no doubt that's the case because there are no, so far as we're aware, there are no huge, great silver strategic stocks around. I mean, this was a situation back in the sort of 70s, and 60s. The Americans held big strategic stocks, and I think, probably various other nations did as well. But nowadays, that's not the case. So you don't have the liquidity, and silver is the best conductor known to man. It is a vital part of, if you like, the move from fossil fuels to green energy and cars and everything else. So, demand for it is going to only accelerate on any projection. So, that's industrial demand. And on top of that, you're going to have demand, I think, monetary demand, as people begin to realize that there is this difference between money and currency. Yeah. Put the two together, it's a very, very compelling argument. And if you look at things like lithium prices have gone up, 4 or 5 times in the last year or two. Uranium prices, again, I don't know, sort of through the roof. What's silver done? Nothing. I think they sort of bashed it down in sort of March 2020. They bashed it down to around about, is it sort of $11 or something? So, we've doubled. I mean, so what? It doesn't actually tell us the situation at all. No. So, and not only that, but you see that the refiners who refine gold also refine silver, and they have to prioritize. They make more money refining gold, generally. I think this is true from, talking to the Swiss refiners, than they do refining silver. So on that basis, when things are running a bit hot, I mean, they're going to do gold, not silver. So you can see that there's a shortage, if you like, of silver on demand. I mean, I think if you went to a Swiss refiner and said, I'd like 20 tons of silver, they'll say, join the queue.
Yeah.
August, if you're lucky. sort of, so it is it's a tight market. It's tight. I mean, obviously you've got lots and lots of coins in circulation. So you've got, for the small player, you do have the potential, if you like, but to get it in any real quantity, I think is actually quite difficult.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, though, that since 1971, I think silver's been at a ratio at over 80 to 1 to gold 6 times. So we're now looking at a 7th occasion where this will occur. And I think history will repeat itself. I have absolutely no doubt about that. I mean, when you look back, the ratio gold to silver going back March 2 years ago was 126 to 1. And we advised all of our customers, get in on it now, right? Because it's going to close in. Now, interestingly enough, it's still got a way to go. As Alasdair said, around 78 to 1 or thereabouts at the moment. So if it repeats itself, if history repeats itself and it closes into 35 to 1, that's a massive gain, isn't it?
It certainly is, and the way I look at that, as far as maybe not looking at the right way, but it is, you have to look at it this way, is that if you buy that little bit more silver today and it goes down to 30 to 1, whatever, and when it does get to 30 to 1, you use your silver to buy more gold.
Absolutely.
You're actually buying gold at half price.
Sure.
And I've never seen gold at in any store at half price. No. It's always the full price.
We can't even buy it at spot.
No. So it's definitely the way to buy gold if you just by buying a bit more silver.
Yeah. It's worth mentioning that going all the way back, the relationship between gold and silver was set around about sort of 15, 16 ounces of silver to 1 of gold. And that was a sort of working monetary arrangement. So, I mean, to have it close to 80 is just complete nonsense. And I'm also told by people who know about these things that the quantity of silver in the earth is probably closer to 6 times that of gold rather than the sort of 16. So, on almost every count,
yes,
silver, is ridiculously cheap.
Yeah, 100%. On the 15th of August, Alasdair, a gentleman by the name of President Nixon said, "Your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today." How wrong could anyone have been? A few years prior to that, 1935, and some people know the story, but it's worth repeating. In 1935, you could buy a suit for $35. You could also buy a suit with a 1 ounce gold coin. Now, if we have a look at it today, right, $35 wouldn't get you very far. But when it comes to purchasing a suit, it might purchase a pocket chief or a tie. Yeah, pair of socks. But hey, what could you do with an ounce of gold? I mean, a suit today, an ounce of gold, let's say $2,500. A suit at $500 would be a fair suit. Okay, so you can purchase 5 suits with an ounce of gold. So how wrong President Nixon was. I know what Egon von Greyer's would say. Well, Darryl, I've told you before, all government officials, all politicians lie all the time. And President Nixon did exactly that. So knowing that and knowing how wrong President Nixon was, Alasdair, my question to you is, how important, especially now, how important is it for people to buy gold?
I mean, basically, you were right about President Nixon. I can also tell you that we had the same thing in this country in 1964. I think it was 64, when Harold Wilson explained the devaluation of the pound. And he said, the pound in your pocket is worth just as much as it was yesterday. Oh, it was something like that. Anyway, so I think the answer to your question really is you have to look at your commitment to the fiat currency world. I mean, all of us are exposed to investments in fiat. You may not own any stocks at all, But guess what your pension fund does? And I assume virtually everybody has some form of pension arrangement. So you've got that problem. There's also the currency problem, which we've been talking about, that the debasement of the currency is likely to accelerate as we see food prices and all the rest of it rise. We have got the problem of rising interest rates and how that undermines virtually everything that you have in fiat currencies. It even has the effects, going back to the very first point you made about on mortgages, Darryl. I mean, if we see mortgage rates go up sort of 10, 15%, something like that, then given that residential housing is all priced on marginal finance, that's obviously going to have a very negative effect. So while you'd hang on to physical assets as opposed to financial assets, a fiat money crisis is a real catastrophe for us all. So how do you escape it? Well, there is only one way to escape it, and that is to possess what is legally defined as real money, and that is gold and silver. Physical gold and silver, not paper gold and silver, not paper representatives of gold and silver, but gold and silver. And price is immaterial. It really is. I mean, it really doesn't matter what the price is, because the reason you buy it is not to profit measured in fiat, but to spend it. You will spend it when nothing else works. That is the whole point behind it.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah, and I think that this quote and I'll show everybody the quote in a moment, but from Ray Dalio, hits it on the head. He says everyone should, and keep in mind, Ray Dalio has a net worth of $18.4 billion. And he says everyone should consider 5 to 10% allocation to gold as a hedge. If you do have an excellent analysis of why you shouldn't have such an allocation to gold, we'd appreciate you sharing it with us. I think it's a remarkable comment. He hasn't had a lot of takers, Alasdair.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, at $18.4 billion net worth, 5% means that he's got at least $1 billion with a B in gold. And there's the quote from the man himself, Ray Dalio. So sets a pretty good example. Yeah. You could just imagine Ray at an investment seminar and putting that to members of the audience. I don't think he'd have anyone prepared to come up and quiz him
on that
one.
No.
Alasdair, thank you. Thank you so much for your input this evening. And it's not just this evening. It's all of the support that you provide us at As Good as Gold Australia, and we appreciate that enormously. I mean, we really get down to, once again, it's the old quote from Peter Daniels, isn't it? I do not care what poorly executed economic decisions are made in the world tonight. Tomorrow I'll still be able to party. Of course he'll be able to party because he's got a lot of gold. He's got control of his financial position. It doesn't matter what happens tomorrow. He's fine.
Yep.
And of course, Egon von Greyer's, her great friend, who has a fabulous quote. He's got many of them, but Brian, I know that you like quoting him.
Well, of course, because he makes it a bit like Ray Dalio, because it's one of the famous quotes from him is, the question is, how much should I own? How much gold and silver should I own?
Yep.
And his answer is, whatever you cannot afford to lose. So, if you have stocks in the stock, if you have money in the stock, currency in the stock markets, if you've got too much rental properties and you got no gold and silver, make a decision, because you may lose it. Before you do, put it into gold and silver.
As this man said, balanced portfolio.
Balanced portfolios. Yeah.
People talk about it all the time. They've got no gold. I mean, can you believe it? Thank you very much, Alasdair. Really appreciate your support. We'd also like to thank our viewing audience, our subscribers who constantly support this channel. Very much appreciated. Until next time, Stay well, stay focused, and goodbye for now.
And goodbye for now.